This is an oral history interview being conducted on December 2nd, 1976, with Eugene C. DeVol in Huebner Hall on the campus of the American College in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Mr. DeVol is one of the Philadelphia area's most prominent practicing CIUs, was a student during his college years of Dr. Huebner, until recently was general agent for the National Life Insurance Company of Vermont in Philadelphia, and is a distinguished past president of the American Society of Chartered Life Underwriters. The interviewer is L.G. Steinbeck. Gene, I appreciate your taking time to make this significant contribution to the college. I forecast for you that these few minutes that we'll be spending together are going to be fun, and it'll even be more fun, I think, when you hear the tape after we make a cassette out of it, and when you see the transcription. You are what I said in that leading statement. You are one of the area's most well-known and respected practicing CIUs, and a friend of all of us who have anything to do with the college or the American Society, and we cherish our relationships with you. I've always had a personal feeling of warmth toward you because we're both from the same state, having having been West Virginians together when it all began. But I don't recall necessarily a great deal about your earlier years. Was it Parkersburg where you...
Parkersburg? That's right.
You were born in Parkersburg?
Yes.
And reared in Parkersburg?
Yes. Went to high school there.
Went to high school. You wouldn't have any reason to remember it, but you may recall years ago I told you and Deanie of the relationship that I have with the Dabneys of Parkersburg. We're related through my father's oldest brother with the Dabneys that I believe were dentists or medical people in...
Well, I don't recall. Deanie and her family knew them. I kind of was aware that they existed, but didn't really know.
Yeah.
Jessie Eleanor, I think her name was. She was somewhat older, perhaps the age of my oldest brother.
Yes. And I don't, as I seem to recall, it was her sister who was my father's oldest brother's wife. I think that's the way it was. It makes no difference, but I always think of that when I think of our being acquainted. But something got you from Parkersburg to the University of Pennsylvania. Tell me about that.
Well, it was a desire to go in the life insurance business. Kids of high school age are impressionable, and when people whom they admire and respect kind of put ideas in their heads, why you act on them kind of on faith without really making them justify what they've suggested. My uncles were, two of them, brothers, were longtime agents of New York Life and very successful. They were the leading agents in West Virginia for New York Life. I was one of the favorite nephews, and they were very good to me when I was growing up, and encouraged me to go to college and encouraged me in the direction of the life insurance business of those very impressionable years. Then there was a fellow in the high school there that all of the young people had a lot of respect for. We called him Dad Steele. He was the assistant principal, but he had a way with young people. And when he learned I was interested in life insurance and the business field, he said, well, the best school in the country is the Wharton School. And I said, well, if that's the best school in the country, that's where I'd like to go. And I suppose I was, I've related this to other people many times. pretty naive, because it wasn't until I got here in Philadelphia and was drawing a check for my tuition when I realized that I was going to the University of Pennsylvania, because I thought I was going to the Wharton School.
Oh, you thought of it as a separate institution.
It never occurred to me that they were the same. I suppose I did complete forms for the admissions office. I'm sure I don't remember them, but I must have. I'm sure they spoke of the University of Pennsylvania, but that just never occurred to me. And if someone from my hometown had said, "Where are you going to school?" I would have said, "Well, I'm going to the Wharton School."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I found out that it was a piece of a much bigger and grander institution, the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. What year was that, Eugene?
1930.
In 1930. Where did you live at the University of Pennsylvania? In one of the dormitories?
In one of the dormitories, on the fourth floor. Oh, if I dug deeply, I could even remember the dorm, and maybe it would come back to me, but it doesn't right at the moment.
And you majored, of course, in business in the Wharton School.
Majored in life insurance.
Majored in life
Never
insurance.
occurred to me to do anything different. Never thought maybe I ought to do something else.
That's interesting. And Dr. Heebner was an active professor at that time.
He was the life insurance. Well, Dave McCann was there. There were others in the department. But,
besides Dr. Heebner and Dr. McCann, whom else can you recall, if anybody, that
well, a
are part of your
fellow
orbit?
that's been active somewhat has been Steve Sweeney and Chet Klein. Those are names that
Did you know that
Doc-
Dr. Klein just passed away about
Yes, I
a
did.
short time ago?
Dr. Knight
Oh, yes.
and
Was Clyde...
McKenna. McKenna was the
Oh,
name I was trying to think of. He was a great short story writer.
Yes.
He was a very good teacher.
Was Clyde Kaler...
Clyde Kaler was another. Sure.
He was in the department.
He was more in finance, and because I took a stock market course from him. Good teacher.
How often, was Dr. Heebner your professor? How much exposure did you have to him, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, he was only lecturing in those days, so that he lectured in insurance. One, the basic life insurance course, and then part two of that course was the property insurance course. And he would listen to him lecture for an hour, one day a week. Then in the other, this was a 5-hour-a-week course, in the other hours you had another professor. A fellow named Everding, who
Say it again.
Henry Everding, who left the Wharton School and went to work for Atlantic Refining, but he was a fine teacher, not a professor, but a really good teacher. I learned a lot from Henry Everding.
And you got your degree in life insurance.
Well, you got a B.S. degree in economics.
Yeah.
It says nothing about life
Yeah,
insurance.
but having majored thus in life insurance, most persons that you've talked to, I'm sure I know all that I've talked to, that ever had any close acquaintanceship or continuous exposure to Dr. Heebner have always felt that he had an unusual influence on their lives.
Oh, yes, no question about that. And he's a remarkable character. He would regularly win the contest for the most popular professor. Sonny Saul, they called him. He had a brother there.
Called Gloomy Gus,
Gloomy Gus.
Is that right?
I didn't really know him. I knew who he was as a professor, but I think he was in the transportation department. I just never got into that department. But Dr. Hebner would pound that table like he frequently did and grit his teeth and make his points, and they were well remembered. And no problem on taking notes from his lectures because they were A, B, C, D, and well organized, although he didn't use any notes, or at least none that I was ever aware of. He would take the full 50 minutes. Start on time and dismiss on time. But he talked back in those days about the CLU movement because it was in its very infancy. But I recall in some one of those lectures, because those of us who majored in life insurance or insurance had at least some interest in the business, and he made the statement that anybody who was going to go in the life insurance business ought to become a CLU. Well, I didn't know what a CLU was. That was a new term to me. But I did plan to go in the business, and so I thought, well, if Dr. Hebner says you ought to become a CLU, that you ought to become a CLU, and I looked up in the requirements and found out what courses you had to take and planned my selection of courses so that by the time I finished, I had taken all the CLU preparatory work.
What did you do then? Take all the CLU examinations at once?
Yeah, I graduated on Wednesday and took the examinations on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
At the end of your 4 years, you did this.
You had to have 3 years experience, so I couldn't get the designation, but you were allowed to take the test. And
this was in 1934 then?
This was 1934.
1934.
I was surprised that I passed them.
Well, it doesn't surprise me that you passed them, but...
it did. Particularly, it always amused me that a fellow with... I'd had some selling experience in the sense that I spent 2 very rewarding summers selling real silk hosiery, door to door, out of town, away from my own town. One summer up in New York State and one summer at the Jersey seashore. I didn't do remarkably well, although I maintained myself in those depression days. Kept the wolf from the door and myself off of my family's back. But I didn't make a lot of money, but I learned a lot. But it was interesting to me that you could pass a course test in salesmanship, life insurance salesmanship, and not have very much experience in it. Although one of those summers I did spend back home in West Virginia endeavoring to sell life insurance. I was 18 at the time, or 17 maybe. So you know I didn't sell very much. But again, I think the first policy I sold that summer was a $500 20-year endowment.
And you did that while you were still going to school?
That was the end of my freshman year, so you know I was about as inexperienced as one can be.
Yeah. Well, now you majored in insurance. You graduated. You took your CLU examinations. You had this bit of experience that you just related. With what company did you affiliate at that time?
Well, I went back to West Virginia in 1934 with New York Life and with these 2 uncles of mine. They had for a small town, a relatively spacious office, plenty of room, and plenty of desks, and so I had a desk and started selling life insurance.
One of the objectives that we want to attain, if we can, in the process of writing this history of the college is to get insights from experienced people such as you about the life insurance business itself, particularly related to what the business was like when you first went into it, contrasted with what we know it to be today. A business composed of of all forms of services today, compared with what probably were simpler times when you entered the business. What was the business like generally, as you recall it, when you went into it?
Well, it was entirely different, Roy, there in West Virginia. These uncles of mine were fine salesmen out of the old school, and they sold by getting into the city life in every facet, so that they knew everybody of any consequence in town, and they called on these people, and they sold them life insurance in those days, relatively large amounts. Today, the figures are entirely different, of course. But it didn't take me very long to discover that all the really good prospects in town, they knew, and they were calling on, and this was Depression days, 1934, and they were scratching for business the same as I was, and so we would, with some frequency, cross paths, and I obviously had to defer to them, and after a while I decided that, well, I was selling some insurance in those days for reasonable amounts for a new man. But I decided that I just couldn't do it there and not, so to speak, stumble over them. Mm-hmm. And they were competition, so to speak, that I couldn't deal with. Another company, you could deal with it. When I ran into them in terms of competition with someone that I played tennis with or had some other relationship with, well, I had to back off. Mm-hmm. And they were fine salesmen. No, I mean, after all, that's why they were good, is because they knew the good people in town and called on them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But the insurance business then, they were what I would think of as illustration salesmen, that they would have their secretary draw up a plan for you. For example, if they were going to call on you, that involved an illustration for 10 or 15 or 25 or whatever amount would fit, showing what we think of now as the live, die, and quit figures. This is what you get if you live, this is what you get if you die, and these figures show what you get if you quit. Mm-hmm. And life insurance was people who had lost so much on other things during the Depression was really a well-received product for those who had money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And their system of selling, which I kind of fell into, was like that. We'd learned about programming and taxes, as you do in the CLU program. I remember Dave McCann's course in I forget what the title of it was, but it had to do with the states. But in West Virginia, programming was a new concept, and no one that I ever found down there used it then. I'm sure they do now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, now what did
So I was only there for 10 months.
That's what I was leading up to. So in the presence of the economic circumstances and the competition, so to speak, of your uncle, I was leading up to asking, what did you do about that situation?
Well, I learned that the fellows I went to school with there that were still there in Parkersburg, if I called on them, and if they bought, which there were a few sales to them, the sales were 2,000, 3,000, really very modest. And I remember going down to Charleston, West Virginia, to call on the fellow that I had went down there from Penn, an engineering student, and had one interview with him, lasted about an hour. He bought 10,000, and no ifs, ands, or buts. And I thought to myself, well, these people have a different vision than the people that I was growing up with, had grown up with. Mm-hmm. And so I came back over here to some college affair in the spring of that following year, and to kind of see what was going on. Of course, I had a lot of friends still in school. But among them was Millard Orr, who was the general agent for the Mass Mutual here in Philadelphia, a very early CLU, and a fraternity brother. And when he had found out that I was in the life insurance business, he began to talk to me about coming to Philadelphia. And this was interesting to me. And although I didn't have any money, he was willing, as the general agents did in those days, to give me a drawing account. And so about 2 months later, I was working with him here in Philadelphia. Great teacher, fine life insurance man. And it was in his organization that I learned about programming and some of the finer arts of life insurance sales.
Millard Orr was one of the persons that had earned the respect a great deal of Dr. Huebner. He used to speak often about Millard. Tell me a little bit about the man.
Well, Millard unfortunately died in his late 40s. He was Clifford Orr's older brother. Clifford was another one of the early CLUs who really a fine life insurance man. They both were. But Millard was a very warm and outgoing person and very successful, fun guy to be with. And, but in I was 35, when we would have a CLU chapter meeting, I don't suppose we would have more than 15 there. It was a very small number. It was, I don't know whether the word is elite, but it was, there weren't very many.
Mm-hmm.
You knew all of them because there weren't too many to learn. Millard was president of the Life Underwriters Association and one of the early presidents of the CLU chapter. And I don't know what year he got the designation, 1930 probably, but
I should know.
Very early, very early.
I do recall it was in the early 30s.
He was one of the early ones. And I spoke earlier about Dr. Huebner and his lectures and his talking about if you're going to be in the life insurance business, you ought to become a CLU. But he spoke of it as if this thing had already been. Well, it was in the sense that the designation was available. But when you got out in the cold world, you found there were hardly any CLUs in 1934 and 5. This was a rarity, not a common thing. Most people didn't understand what it was. But Dr. Huebner spoke of it as if it was a tremendous thing then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he didn't stretch the truth or lie about it, but it's what you spoke of earlier. His enthusiasm for something would make him see the possibilities as if they were right here.
Yes, yes, yes.
And in a sense they were. It just took time to bring them about.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, your reference to Millard, you did join his agency then with the Mass Mutual, right? And how long were you with that agency?
Well, I was with him for 9 years until he died.
What caused Millard's death, incidentally?
Well,
I don't know that I
he'd
recall.
had a heart murmur. How much that contributed, one doesn't know, but he got pneumonia. And in those days, that was 1944 or 5, the sulfa drugs had just come out, but none of the drugs they had would touch what he had, and his heart finally wouldn't sustain him through the crisis. Now, whether the murmur had anything to do with that, I'm not knowledgeable enough to know. I always thought it did, but maybe not. Maybe yes. And shortly after that, when the dust had cleared, and I tried to get the Mass Mutual General Agency for myself, but in their wisdom, the Massachusetts Mutual didn't see fit to appoint me. And shortly after that, Cliff Orr invited me to go down with him. Down meaning downstairs on the 10th floor of the Mass Mutual, having been on the 16th floor.
Of which building was that?
1616 Walnut.
1616 Walnut.
Which was in those days filled with life insurance and agencies and people, including Walter Craig, who I don't need to tell you who Walter Craig is, because his influence is still on the CLU Journal.
Yes, very much.
And that CLU Journal was born there in 1616 Walnut with Cliff Orr and Walter Craig. I don't mean they were the only ones, obviously, but they were surely the motivating ones at the time. But I went down to the National Life. Titles don't mean very much. I was Associate General Agent, but we only had 2 or 3 agents, so it wasn't. This was wartime, and there wasn't the opportunity to recruit and develop at that particular point. So it was mostly a question of trying to help Cliff develop the agency. He was then busy. I forget the years, whether he was president of the American Society the following year, but around about that time.
46, 47.
I guess that was a year or two later. He was involved with NALU. He'd been president, I think, or again, I kind of forget the years precisely. But while he was away, so to speak, at the wars, NALU and CLU, I was keeping the shop at home. But because of him, I learned an awful lot about what was going on nationally in NALU and nationally in CLU, because he was in the middle of those developing years.
You were very close to Cliff, Gene, and of course he's one of the stars in the firmament of
it's too bad you died before you.
Yes, before we could.
Yes,
that is so very true. Characterize that man for me as well as you can, would you?
Oh, I don't know that I'm good at that. Compared to his brother Millard, he didn't seem to be, to other people, as warm, as concerned. But when you got to know him, you found that he was at least as concerned, maybe more so, although one can't make precise comparisons about that sort of thing. But you did discover that he had an inner warmth and a concern for other people. He had a great facility for writing. He wrote a play that was put on by the Philadelphia Association. John Q. Underwriter, I think, was the name of it. Developed a dialogue and full of humor. It was very good. But Cliff also was a fraternity brother, as was Millard. We were Sigma Chi's, and so we had a lot of mutuality of interest outside the life insurance business. Had a lot of fun together, as a matter of fact.
Well, I had the pleasure and privilege of knowing Cliff, although of course I never met Millard. In fact, the last time I saw Cliff, he had retired and was living in Florida, and there was I now forget the event, but It was an event being conducted quite near where he was residing, and none of us knew that he resided near, but he knew that the meeting was taking place, and to the delight of all of us, he came to the meeting and, in fact, attended the meetings, I recall, lasted 2 or 3 days, and he was teaching CRU classes there.
That's right. He probably had, I don't know, I don't see how anyone could have had any better passing ratio than his students, because something like 85% of his students passed the CLU exams that they took. And maybe I'm not precisely sure of the figure, but I don't see how anyone could have done much better. Yeah. And he was a good teacher because he had a faculty of being able to draw something fairly complex down to its fundamentals, and that's all he would get these people into. He would tell them, for example, that he didn't know anything about the gold standard, but he could teach them enough of what was in the textbook so that they could answer the questions on the examination. He was no economist, and no money expert, and, which I think means that he was a good teacher.
Good teacher, sure. That's right. Gene, a number of questions keep popping to mind. Before I ask any of them and probe further into this area and time of your life, I want to fold into the record where this lady that we all love so much came into focus. When did Deanie come into your life?
Oh, she came into it in high school, very early. She was, I think I was a sophomore in high school, and she was a year ahead of me. Or maybe I was a freshman. She was a year ahead of me. I don't really quite remember precisely, but my first, and I think I've told other people this, my first recollection of her was one day, our high school was a big, wide school, about a city block in width, so that it had long corridors, and as you do in school, you are walking down those corridors, and I passed this pretty girl who I wasn't sure who she was, but like young people do when they pass someone that they kind of want a second look at, you turn around. And she also turned around, and that was my first recollection of her. And I was talking about this one time, and I said if I was walking down that corridor again and I passed this same girl, I would turn around again and hope that she would. But that's a long, long time ago.
Yes. How long, when were you married? While you were in college or after college?
After college. Those were the days when people waited until they could get their feet on the table someplace.
Had you come to Philadelphia?
Yes, oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I see. Gene, when we were talking a moment ago about the earlier days when you were first associated with Millard and with Cliff, and you mentioned Walter Craig. You also mentioned that in those days you could almost count the number of CRUs on both hands in town. Who were some of the other persons of those days that would come to mind that you think?
Well, one takes a risk in naming people in that you may forget people, but I bumped into one today at the Union League after lunch, and that was Sherry Baketell, who's well known here in Philadelphia. Sherry's quite well, looked very well.
Yeah, I see Sherry every once in a while. He stops in. Lives not too far from
Another that was very prominent in those days and an outstanding fellow was Irvin Bendiner, who was, I don't know whether his name's familiar to you. Irvin.
Oh, very much so. I don't know him. He had passed away, I think, before I came to him.
Died in Well, the time of such things escape you. About perhaps 1950, maybe it was before or after that.
It was just before that, I believe, Gene.
Could well be.
Yeah.
But he taught, I had him at the university, and he taught that CLU preparatory course in life insurance selling. And if I passed that examination, which I did, I owe it to the notes that I got out of Irvin Bendiner's class in selling.
Mm-hmm.
Very practical and very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But Bendiner was another, Big Tal, Craig, Joe Reese, of course, was another one who was very active. I think maybe he was the first president or the second of the chapter, which wasn't much. Runcie Tapnell was in the picture either then. There was a fellow that had a farm out here that we used to go to for picnics.
Camp Wood?
Well, Camp Wood was one, but there was another. And this other fellow, we ought to be able to think of his name, but anyway, he became president of the Life Underwriters Association and then later left the business. Went in the pretzel business in Reading.
Oh, is that right?
But his name...
I was about to say the head of Tasty Cake used to be in the business here, too.
Yes, that's true. I didn't know him well. I can't think of this fellow's name. Maybe it will come to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, those are some of the names. I'm sure there are others if I saw a...
Mm-hmm. When you were speaking about that small coterie of people, I was just wondering how many of them you would happen to recall as being in the group.
I'm sure there were others.
Yeah.
I got to be, well, during the war with so many people away, and I had a bum left arm, still do, which made me 4F, so I was, when the time came when I was drafted, I was turned down. So I was one of those who stayed home, and relatively early became secretary of the CLU chapter, which is a great opportunity for a young person to you learn what's going on, you learn people.
Mm-hmm.
You're involved in all the discussions, you're on the so-called executive committee and so on, and it was really a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Because from that I moved along and became president.
Well, that was one of the points that I was leading up to a moment ago. Those of us who know you well always recall your being very deeply, very actively involved in the work of CLU here in the Philadelphia area and then later in the national scene. Why were you involved?
Oh, I don't know. You know what I mean? I never thought much about such a question. I think one gets a commitment to something like CLU because you see the great need in the industry for doing something about the prestige of life insurance people. And there's no secret about the fact that you can't demand prestige. You just can't get it that way. You have to earn it. And as an industry, the only way I would ever thought that life underwriters could earn prestige was by performance, and this was an educational way of preparing one to perform. Obviously, the need of CLU is not in the designation, but it's in what you learn, which is sometimes hard to get people to understand because people want the designation without learning the fundamentals, but it's the fundamentals that if you learn them, enable you to think through to the solution of problems, because you keep applying these same fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
The details may vary.
Mm-hmm.
The knowledge, precise knowledge, taxation, and the laws and rules and regulations are always changing, but the fundamentals of getting at problems don't change very much. So it's a commitment, I guess, to the fact that if we can someday get enough CLUs, enough well-educated, well-trained life underwriters, that we will have the receptivity of the public that we'd all like to have.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't have it.
Yeah, that's so. Dr. Hemer used to say, when we have 25,000 practicing CLUs, we will have arrived. We're just about at that point right now.
But the population's what, doubled?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Since then, so
sure.
the figure's got to double to have the same.
Sure. That's correct. Well, in being involved, you've always been a very constructive contributor, a constructive critic of the CLU program, always urging anybody that's involved with the program to excel in what they're doing, and I'm meaning both the society as well as the college. The college has, in recent years, taken some rather dramatic steps. We've branched out into 3 schools now, as against the more simple program that you were involved in.
Yes, that's right.
I'm wondering whether you have any observations about that.
No, I neither praise nor criticism, because I'm just not able to know enough about the whole big educational process in this country, which is complex, to be able to say, well, the college ought to be doing this, or not doing this, or doing that, or not doing that. I've been impressed with the Center for Adult Education. I think that's the name, but that isn't the exact name. I'm in the ball field. That there's an opportunity to make a contribution to the way adults get educated in all things, and this will elevate the prestige of the American college if it can learn some of these things that are transferable techniques.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because of the college's relationship to life insurance and life underwriting, it will also make a contribution to elevating the prestige of the life underwriter.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't work directly at the problem, except insofar as those learning processes will enable life underwriters to better learn what we need to, and that's an adult learning proposition,
Mm-hmm.
at least mostly is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not able to really, I'm impressed, but
well, we're moving forward at a considerably rapid rate. The number of new students each year is increasing by 10%. We're administering 25,000, going on 30,000 examinations every semester now. We have over 50,000 students involved in the Eugene School, some 10,000 in the other 2 schools, the School of Advanced Career Studies and the Graduate School of Financial Sciences. We're now offering a bona fide new master's degree.
I've read about all of it.
The college is moving on, is what I'm saying.
How many of these 50,000 students are life underwriters, field men, agents, or general agents?
It breaks down about 50-50, Gene. About 50% of the students that are practicing field underwriters, as you and I know agents to be. Now, if you want to put general agents and managers in there, you get about 50%.
I would put them in there.
You get about 50%. But once we've said that, now we're talking about persons that work, say, in the cashier's office in an agency, or in various departments of home offices and the like, that compose the remainder of the 100%, with
Pretty high percentage.
A very high percentage.
Well, the 50,000 in the pipeline, if that's the way to put it, how many squeeze out the other end with the designation?
Well, of course, at an increasing rate, 2,337 in September, and that number will steadily creep up from that point. If you think that for 50 years we've been in the process of offering learning experiences to persons who want the CLU diploma, in 50 years we have about 30,000. But if we're graduating 2,300, 2,400 a year now, and see an average of 3,000 a year, let's say for the next 10 years, we'll have as many in the next 10 years as we had in the first 50 years graduating.
Continued on side 2.
Well, I understand the point, and I'm glad to find out that a relatively high percentage, I don't know what the figure is from what you say, maybe 60% of these are field people.
I don't think you'd have to be too loose with your definitions to show that 60% of those that are active students are related to the field, are out there in some close interacting way with the public about the subject of life insurance. We're getting into the graduate schools, in the SACS, School of Advanced Career Studies, and in the graduate school, and increasing a number of persons that are from other professions, increasing numbers of bankers, trust officers, lawyers, CPAs, and the like. Not a greatly significant percentage yet, but increasing numbers. And this is having its effect out there also in these cities where studying is going on, say in estate planning, where the attorneys and the CPAs and the bankers and the CLUs are all studying together. This is having a marked favorable effect in the uplifting of the prestige of the practicing CLU.
Were you still with the society when we had the big debate about multiple CLU designations?
Yes.
The year again escapes me as to what year that was.
I remember it. Yeah.
1955, maybe.
Yeah, 55, 56. Yeah.
But I'm sure glad
that we stuck to one designation.
That we stuck to one designation.
Well, that still rears its head, Gene.
Because you can imagine now if you were going to tackle the problems with 4 or 5 different designations, which is what they were then talking about, probably need 4 times that many today.
Yeah, that's right.
But that debate festered hot and heavy for a couple of years.
Yeah, but I think it was much
a constructive debate after all. New fields require
very, very constructive debate. And I think because it was met head on by all of those interested, regardless of what their points of view were, I think it was resolved rather resoundingly at the time, because it's never been a major issue since. Although from time to time for perhaps an old reason or a new one, it will rear its head. But it was one of the great turning points in the program. I don't think there's any question about that. As I was saying to you before we started to go on tape, I never really know entirely what the questions are that I would like to ask, but I did ask one completely spontaneously that I want to repeat now. I mean, I asked it spontaneously before we went on tape, and I want to repeat it now. I've always felt very closely acquainted with you for many reasons, all of them good. I've always felt you to be one of the most devoted persons to the field of life insurance that I ever knew. I never wanted to start an argument with you about life insurance because I knew I'd lose it ahead of time.
That's because I speak with great conviction, even though I'm not sure sometimes.
But I've always respected you for that, and I've always respected you for having really experienced a distinguished career, one that's just a hallmark of success by any definition. And it has been that. I don't mean to flatter you, but that's the way I look at it. Many of your admirers look at it in the same way. And I'll be darned if I don't feel it has to come from some basic philosophy of life that you've lived by. I see it reflected in your business success, in your family life, in you, the person. And if I ever win one argument with you, I want to win that one right now because I believe it's true.
Well, I don't know about that. I've always admired these people, which I'm not one of, who can, this is right out of the CLU management courses. You set up a 10-year plan and you decide where you want to be 10 years from now, and then you break down in between the steps to take that will get you to that. And I don't have any quarrel with that as being a sound technique for accomplishing anything, but I've never felt inclined to do that. I don't know that I wander through life, but it just seems to me that one gets prepared for opportunity by study and by learning, and hopefully you'll recognize opportunities as they come up. I think there's a destiny working. Always have felt that. For me, I've always felt that whatever I put my mind and hand to will turn out all right for reasons I can't really justify from the standpoint of logic, but I have felt that way. I've told people I'm lucky that that the things I do will turn out well, whether that's golf or sports or what. Now, I don't suppose in reality, my common sense says I don't have any more luck than anybody else, because luck, it seems, ought to be parceled out equally. Whether it is or not, I don't know. But I do feel that way, that I'm a lucky person and that things will turn out well for me. Mm-hmm. That there's a destiny working, and all I have to do is to be alert to the opportunities that come up each day. Mm-hmm. And my life will be full and perhaps fulfilled. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I don't have any well thought out philosophy that I can present to you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think there's, and I've talked to this about agents that I've brought in the business, there's a priority of loyalties, there's a priority of concerns that one should have, and then our work, that first priority should always be to the client, that his interests come first and have to be thought of as number one. Even though one might say, well, your first loyalty ought to be to your family, and I think in another sense that's true, or someone else has said, well, your first loyalty ought to be to God, and if you get that priority right, all the others will fall in line. And I'm sure that's true, but on the other hand, it isn't precise enough. And I think when you get down to the life insurance business, an agent's first loyalty ought to be to his client, and his second one ought to be to his general agent or manager, and people might quarrel with that, but I think that's true, to his local organization. And thirdly, perhaps to himself, because if there's a priority of interest, he comes in there someplace. Mm-hmm. And the company, God bless the companies, and we're devoted to them and they're required, but they are big and well able to manage for themselves, and their interest in this priority, in my opinion, is lower. All of this has to be done, though, with integrity for all of the parties in the transaction. You can't flim-flam the company, because this will enable a client to get a standard policy to which he's not entitled. This would not be integrity. Mm-hmm. And that would be a malfunctioning, I suppose, of the priority of loyalties, that you should stuff this EKG that has a flattened T-wave into your briefcase and throw it away rather than send it to the home office. I just don't think you can do that. But that has nothing to do with the... I don't think you should take an inferior contract that your company has and persuade someone to buy it because the company does better on that contract. Their interest in that respect are tail end rather than front end. I don't know whether that's a philosophy or not, but
it is. I say it frankly and in great respect. I've known a number of CLUs, practicing CLUs, deft in the art of causing people to see what they ought to see and then helping them do things with what they perceive about themselves. I've known many gifted ones. I've been blessed to know many gifted ones.
I'm sure. You've known the best there is around.
Still one of the blessings of my life. But I've always thought of you as one of the more dogged ones. And I've always respected you for it. When somebody should do something and you've established an aura of agreement with that individual that they ought to do it, you turn them every way loose until they do it. Well, and I didn't know what to... I guess one of the reasons I'm into this area of questioning is I always wonder what's behind it. What drives you to do that? Because it's right, it's effective, it's a very commendable characteristic, but it seems to be more uniquely characteristic to you than the others whom I know.
Well, I doubt that. I do think that when you make a promise to someone, not necessarily a promise, but when you tell a client, prospective client, that you'll do certain things, I think you have an obligation to do those things. I suppose there's sometimes you find out you just can't possibly fulfill. In that case, your client's entitled to know about it. But as you move along, you become very careful, though, about what you promise to do for people, because you don't want to promise the moon and not do it.
It's interesting. Let me change the scene just a little bit. As you look back over the years of your having been involved in CLU work in the local chapter, here in the American Society as a national organization, in your acquaintanceships that you had with Dr. Huebner, Dr. McCann, and Dave Gregg, and others that represent, say, the college and the society, because they were living right here in your home area. And you look back across all of that as a body of experiences that you've had. What have been the most meaningful ones to you, Gene?
Oh, gee. It's hard to get down to specifics in answer to a question like that. I think it's the association with the great people that I think back to the time when I was president of the society and the executive committee that we had and the fine people that we were involved with. And the good times we had, but they were good times constructively working on some aspect of the society affairs. And all those fellows, Fitz Traylor is one, bless his soul, who's since died. And Fitz, you were going out as managing director the year he was president, if I remember correctly, because Fitz and I were involved with finding a successor. And, he was a great fellow to work with.
Yes, he was.
But he's only illustrative of the other. Bob Woods was another far-sighted, visionary type of fellow who I remember in our meetings brought out the name of Blueprint for Progress. And we made some substantial changes in those years. We increased the dues and laid the groundwork for getting a lot more revenue, which was badly needed, so that we could be on the road to some of the things that we knew we ought to be doing but didn't have the resources to do. And Bill Andrews and Million Hogue. What was the fellow from Boston?
George Knightley.
George Knightley. Interesting fellow. He used to say that he would, when he would introduce himself to people on his debit route when he was an agent, his name was George Nightlife, because they could never remember Knightley, but Nightlife.
They could remember Nightlife.
They could remember
George very well. I never heard him use that expression. That's interesting.
He was a very, very fine fellow. Very fine fellow.
I'll always remember George for he encouraged me. I was involved with building the new Sunday school building in our church in Wayne. And he always encouraged me to take plenty of time to do a good job, because he felt that was very important for me to do. And at one moment when he said that on a particular day, I said, well, now, if you really feel that, why don't you attend a meeting with me tonight and give me some support? I said, I know what your religious persuasion is, but you're a broad-minded guy. Come and join me. Let's see what we can do together. And he did. And we took a bunch of tough-nosed Methodists in Wayne, and we just turned their thoughts around and got them to do things that they should have been doing before. And George got so excited about it that after he went home, he sent me a $100 check as a contribution.
Isn't that interesting? Well,
to the
that's illustrative of what I meant about him, that he was, his background was different from that of many of us that were involved in this, but he's a very genuine, sincere fellow with a lot of ability.
Very much so.
Dedicated to CLU.
Yes. Well, it's interesting that you
But gee, these were all interesting, great people to work with, and we worked hard at our meeting, but we had fun. We had a lot of fun. And the memories go back to all those people.
What do you suppose it is that what you said is so true, that CLUs, when they do work for the college or they do work for the society, they work as if they're about to earn a fortune for doing it. They work hard and unrelentingly and devotedly, but you don't find that in any, at least I'm not aware of that being true in other professions. Why do you suppose it's so true?
I don't know whether it's only true about CSU or not.
I don't know either, but I don't
experience isn't broad enough to.
Well, you've been in Kiwanis work, and
Well, we have people like that dedicated in Kiwanis. They really are.
but
Not all, but many.
It seems to be peculiarly true, or uniquely true of CLUs. I want to talk to enough of them before I hang up my suit to find out someday. They're remarkable people on many counts, but they're particularly remarkable in this particular respect.
But it's my observation, without really knowing, that these same people are not just interested in CLU. They have other interests, different ones, different interests. Their college, their church, projects in their community that they're involved with, to which they give that same kind of dedication. Maybe not at the same time. But I'm sure this is true because I read the backgrounds of these people, and you see that the YMCA, they're head of this, or the Chamber of Commerce, or Kiwanis, or Rotary, or their church, or whatever. I guess it's the kind of people they are, really. That's what makes them good at selling life insurance, and because they're that kind of person, they are also outgoing and interested in other things.
I hope you don't think what I'm about to say is unfair. I swear to heaven it just came to mind, but so hang in there with me. When I think about the real soldiers of CLU, such as you and Bob Woods and the others that we've mentioned, been talking about, they've got a lot to say to young people in the business. Right over there in that building that you can see and I can't, where I'm sitting, there's a new class of young guys that have been in the business about 3, 4, 5 years, that are assembling to get their first orientation on their first CLU class that they're going to be starting by coming to campus here a couple nights a week starting in January. If you and I walked over there right now, and I'd make you known to that group, and I'd give you a proper introduction so that they'd know they'd be talking to an old pro like you. And I would tell them that I brought him here because I think maybe he has something to say to you that might be helpful to you at this point in your career. What are some things that you probably...
maybe some of the things I've already said, but if I were going to do that, I would want to...
I
wouldn't want to talk
I understand
extemporaneously off the top of my head without sorting some things out.
But I want you to do part of it for me now, extemporaneously.
Well, outside of the things that talked about, particularly this business of priorities, which I think if one can get that straight, that it's very helpful if you don't have to think that through. But maybe maybe people have that anyway, I don't know. But it's been my experience that they don't have, and that people who come into our work from other fields feel that they have to have a great loyalty to the company first. And I say, no, not in our work here. Great loyalty has to be out here to your client, your customer first. And outside of that, in fact, one needs to prepare themselves by learning what they are learning. I've often said to prospective agents, one of the things we'll do with you when you come in here is help you to become a CLU, not because you want to be a CLU, but because you want to learn what you need to learn to be effective in the life insurance business. And these people in the American College have sat down and looked over all the knowledge that there is. And they've concluded that these are the areas in which a life underwriter needs to be well informed and knowledgeable. And you just don't have to worry about that. All you have to do is, they've done all that for you. All you have to do is go over what they've worked out. Once you've gone over it, they'll give you an examination, see if you learned any of it, and if you can pass the examination, you'll get the CIU designation. But it's this body of knowledge that one needs to have to be effective. But it is interesting that there are an awful lot of people, 25,000 active CIUs and maybe 225,000 life underwriters, that there are 200,000 functioning out there. Well, many of them have the knowledge. Many of them have the knowledge, that's for sure. But they've never been tested in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't have anything